Tang. I'm joined here today by my colleagues Jerry Salanga and Caitlin Thaney, who will help present the information about the IOI Fund to you all throughout the next session and to answer questions. Next slide, please. This session is being recorded. A recording of this session will be shared with all the attendees and registrants and be posted on YouTube. We do have a public shared notes document. Please head over there. If we could have the link in the chat, please, and sign in. That will also be a space where you can add your questions as they occur through the presentation. You are also welcome to put your questions into the Zoom chat. You are more than welcome to ask the questions in your language of preference, that being English, French, Spanish, or Portuguese. Our interpreters will translate that. If you do that, we ask for your patience. The IOI staff here needs to listen to that question in English and make a response. So that may take a little bit more time than usual. Thank you for your patience in advance. Next, please. As we start, we do have some ground rules and expectations. This call is designed as a place for learning and conversation. We ask everyone to be curious, to hold space for one another, and to be respectful. You can find a link to our code of conduct here on the slide and in the chat as well. If you do unfortunately experience any sort of behaviors, unwelcoming behaviors, please do use the reporting methods detailed in the code of conduct. Next, please. All right, at this point, I would love to hand over to Caitlin, our Executive Director, to introduce IOI.
Hi, everybody. For those that are new to IOI, our mission as a not-for-profit initiative is to increase the investment in and the adoption of open infrastructure for research. We do this in a few different ways. Three core pillars of our work: we provide research and tools and other supports to help guide decision makers and understand the broader ecosystem and landscape for those that are looking to develop infrastructure, advocate for open infrastructure, choose open infrastructure, and more. We provide targeted support of applying that research and working with teams that are either looking to grow or scale their infrastructures or go through moments of transition, or looking to adopt different practices to embed open infrastructure in their work. And those are different sort of structured engagements where our team provides critical capacity to those that are looking to embed infrastructure or adapt open infrastructure for their own needs. And then lastly, which is why we're here today, we run funding pilots. IOI was started with the idea that we needed to increase the amount of funding that went into critical open infrastructure to support the research community. And over the past 5 years, we've run a number of different infrastructure-focused and community-focused funding pilots. The one that you'll hear Jerry tell you more about today is our largest yet, and thinking about where we can catalyze and bring more funding to the ecosystem to address needs that we hear through our research and also deep engagement with you all. These core programs work harmoniously and work together, and they focus on infrastructure that helps move forward support for the research community, including infrastructure that helps further open access and to the data and research to provide more equitable and fair opportunities for others to participate in the research process. This is in line with declarations from UNESCO, the Barcelona Declaration, the Nelson Memo in the United States, G7 communique, EU Council guidance, and more. And with that, I'm going to hand it to my colleague, Jerry. We're going to give some high-level information about the fund, and then we will be opening it up for questions. So Jerry, over to you.
Thank you very much, Caitlin, and thank you to all of our participants today for joining us. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the IOI Fund for Network Adoption, the eligibility criteria, go through some of the scope the parameters of the fund, and also after that, we'll be happy to take any questions that may emerge from the crowd. Next slide, please. So the IOI Fund for Network Adoption has a couple of objectives, and the fund was actually focused on strengthening research networks in Africa, Latin America, and North America by supporting the adoption and expansion of open data and content infrastructures. As you can see on the screen, we have 5 different core objectives that drive this fund. So objective 1 is increased access to open data and content. And so in this particular objective, we aim to increase access to open data and content. We are supporting projects that make research data more findable, more accessible, more interoperable, and more usable, the FAIR principles. We also prioritize projects that demonstrate a commitment to open principles like open licensing and fair data. We will evaluate projects based on how much they actually increase shared data and content and how they effectively track usage. Objective number 2 is advancement of collaborative research on critical global issues. We want to advance collaborative research on global issues, particularly those related to the SDGs. And we are looking for projects that use open data to address challenges like climate, health, sustainable development, among the other SDGs. And in this particular objective, we'll assess projects on their potential to boost research activity related to these global issues. The third objective is sustainable and community-driven infrastructure. We want to support projects that are built with active community participation and have a clear plan for long-term sustainability. In terms of how we would evaluate this objective, we'll be looking for evidence of increased sustainability of open infrastructure providers and services. Objective number 4 would be fair and accessible research ecosystems. We strive to create fair and accessible research ecosystems that remove barriers to participation and ensure that everyone has a chance to contribute, particularly when you're looking at historically underserved communities. In terms of how we evaluate this, we'll be looking for projects that drive investment towards a research ecosystem that is more equitable and representative of diverse populations, as can be evidenced by also some of the geographies that have been chosen in this particular fund. The last objective that we have here is strengthening networks as providers of shared infrastructure. And we believe that by adopting open infrastructure solutions, networks can enhance their services and lead in advancing open science. We will evaluate if the project will strengthen the network's position as a shared infrastructure provider. To ensure that we achieve these objectives, we have developed a rigorous evaluation process. We prioritize projects that have a clear understanding of local needs, have a feasible plan, a strong team that supports the work, and a commitment to open principles. We'll also look for projects that will benefit from IOI's support and have the potential for significant impact. For more details on our evaluation criteria and process, please refer to section 5 of the call for proposals document. Next slide, please. So as part of this particular fund, there's a number of partners who believe in the vision that we have for this fund and have actually joined us to support this initiative. We have Welcome, who are the anchor contributor of this particular fund. And also we have additional partners. We have Digital Science and the Kale Austin Foundation, who have partnered with us as founding contributors and supporters of this particular fund. Next slide, please. So in terms of the overview of the fund, there's a number of things that we just wanted to highlight as kind of like the core things that we wanted to share with the community about this fund. One would be in terms of the funding priority of this fund. we are looking at the shared adoption, implementation, and expansion of open data infrastructures by networks of research institutions to address pressing global issues. As I referenced in the previous slides, we are looking at solving some of the emergent problems that we see in society that are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, issues to do with climate change, agriculture, healthcare, and other issues that are related to the SDGs. In terms of the focal regions of the fund, we are looking at Latin America, North America, and Africa. And for each of the successful grantees of this particular fund, we are looking at providing funding of between $1 to $1.5 million. And this will be for projects ranging between 2 to 3 years. We expect that the projects may commence from October 2025, from between October 2025 and February of next year. In terms of the application process, we have the deadline for pre-applications, which is going to be April 30th, 2025 at midnight, and this is for anywhere on the planet. Next slide, please. So when we look at what do we mean by open data and content infrastructure? So we look at these as shared tools, systems, and services that make research data and scholarly content more accessible, reusable, and impactful. So what do we mean when we talk about open in this particular context? Open simply means that the infrastructures that will be supported have to adhere to the principles of transparency, community governance, and open licensing to ensure that the knowledge is accessible as widely as possible and can be built on by others. So some of the examples of these open data and content infrastructures include open access repositories, data management systems, PIDs, open source publishing services and platforms, and harvesting and aggregation services. Next slide, please. So in terms of the eligibility criteria, there's a number of different criteria that we have set aside that in order for an organization or a network to be eligible for funding, they have to meet these criteria. So I'll just go one by one on these criteria, and then we can be able to take any questions later if any arise from these criteria. So number one would be the lead applicant must be a national or an international research network that meets these criteria. Number one is in terms of network membership. The network members must be institutions and or research performing organizations, RPOs, networks of institutions and or RPOs, or national and regional research agencies. So here there's a couple of things to clarify. Networks with only individual members are not eligible because we are looking at networks that have an institutional membership. Networks with multiple types of memberships that include organizational memberships are eligible, but only the organizational members are taken into account when evaluating the number and geography criteria below. In terms of the next criteria is the number of members. So for a network to be eligible, if you're a national network whose members are mainly in one country, you must have at least 10 institutions or research performing organizations. International networks must have at least 5, must have members in at least 5 different countries. So important distinction to note between the national and the international networks. In terms of the membership geography, the majority of network members must be based in one of the 3 regions that I referenced earlier. That's Africa, North America, and Latin America. So one of the 3. In terms of the registered location, so networks cannot be based in or registered in Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Syria, or Cuba. And this is because the US and the European governments have certain sanctions on fiscal relationships with organizations and people in these countries. And as a US-based nonprofit, we have to comply to those regulations. They're called, in the US, they're called the OFAC regulations. The next point would be on the fiscal relationship with members. So networks must have a fiscal relationship with their members. So for example, in this instance, the members of a particular network must either pay like a membership fee, or the network in itself would kind of aggregate funding from different funders and cascade that down to their members. Then the other thing is the ability to accept funding from a US-based charity. And as I mentioned earlier in the point related to the sanctions, is we have to be able to kind of channel funding from IOI as a US-based charity to these organizations. So the ability to receive that funding is key. The next one is the point of contact. So networks must provide a point of contact who will kind of be reporting on progress and the impact of the award to the IOI team. The other point is language. So network core staff must be able to communicate in English at working proficiency. And this is because in addition to the funding, there's also additional targeted support that IOI will be providing as part of the implementation of the grant award. Important things to note is that current IOI employers, contractors, and clients are not permitted to apply. This is to reduce incidences of bias, and also applicants must be able to abide by the local laws that apply to the activities in the specific countries. So in addition to all of the criteria that I have mentioned, we prioritize a strong networks to have a strong existing service relationship with their members, including a history of providing shared services to further open access to research and open research infrastructures. We also believe a lot in community governance, and the networks must have active member participation in the governance of the network. Then the next one is a demonstrated commitment to open science and open research infrastructure, including efforts to expand the adoption or extractive, non-extractive research infrastructure solutions for the network. Next slide, please. So one of the things that also is very important to note is that we, for this particular fund, are accepting joint applications. So this refers to a situation where two different networks can come together and maybe pitch a proposal for consideration for the IOI Fund for network adoption. For this particular situation, we require to have a designated lead applicant who's going to be responsible for the receipt and administration of the awards. And in addition to the criteria that we have just gone through in the previous slide, the lead applicant must meet all of the criteria with the exceptions of the number of members criterion and the membership geography criterion. I think additional context of this can be found in the call for proposals document. There's a specific section related to joint applications. Next slide, please. So in terms of the application process for this fund, we have divided the process into 4 distinct stages. So stage 1 would be what we call a network readiness assessment. And this is more or less meant to be a self-assessment of the network to check whether it's compatible with the objectives of the fund. And so we encourage all networks to start with the network readiness assessment, because it would either give you the go-ahead in terms of whether you're compatible or not. After you have filled in the network readiness assessment and you have received a message from the IOI team that you are eligible to continue, then we encourage you to sign, to fill in a pre-application form. This is just a 3-page document that we expect that the applying network would give us like an overview of their project, the aims and objectives of the proposal. Then also after that, if you are successful, the 10 best proposals after the pre-application stage will be invited to write a full proposal. And this is where now we would look at getting information on the impact of the project, the timeline, the kind of like the technical bits of the proposal, and also the financial information and risk assessments will also be conducted. So IOI will also review the submitted information and also conduct additional interviews and research where needed. So after the 10 proposals, in the full proposal stage, the best 3 proposals would then move into the due diligence stage, where as IOI, we will also look to do our own verification on reputational risks, the governance management and oversight risks, the programmatic risks, and the financial risks. And this particular stage is expected to take place around September of this year. Next slide, please. So as we get to the culmination of this presentation, I just wanted to recap a number of key dates that eligible networks need to be aware of as they prepare their applications. So for the pre-application form submission deadline, the deadline is on the April of the 30th, 2025. And for this, as I mentioned earlier, for you to actually be able to access the pre-application form, you need to have conducted the network readiness assessment first. Then the next stage would be in terms of notification of the pre-application results. We expect this to happen at around June of the 6th, and shortlisted applicants will then be invited to submit a full proposal. And in terms of the submission deadline for the full proposals, we anticipate this to be around July 18th of 2025. And then we expect that the final funding decisions will be communicated around October of 2025. So in terms of the start dates of the projects, this is expected to be anywhere between October 2025 and February of 2026. And just as a caveat, in terms of the dates that we have provided here, these dates potentially may be subject to change depending on the volume of applications that we get in this particular fund application process. Next slide, please. Great. So I feel like that has been a lot of talking on our end. Now we would want to welcome questions from the floor. I can already see that there's a number of questions on the shared notes document. So the first question that we have is, can I apply if my network platform web app/web app is still under construction? I think in terms of how we would view this, we would lean towards having projects that are already existing, because then that also gives us some of the compliance with some of the criteria that we had mentioned above in terms of that strong institutional kind of history that exists, the commitment to some of the principles that we have referenced. So I believe that while we are not discounting that, our preference and our priority would be to existing initiatives that already are compliant with the eligibility criteria that we have. Perhaps maybe one of my colleagues also would want to support that, or maybe to also chime in with their opinion.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think, Jerry, underscoring everything that you just said, for this pre-proposal phase, we're also looking for a deeper understanding of the network of institutions or research performing organizations that this would be embedded upon. So I know we've had a number of infrastructures, and some infrastructures actually they sit in both of those camps in terms of being a network of institutional members and providing that service, as well as providing an infrastructure. But for those that are just the infrastructures that are looking to be supported or being rolled out across these projects, that I believe, if, Emmy, feel free to chime in here. That is a later stage in the process once we've identified that relationship with the institutions or research performing organizations and needs, where we'll be assessing the infrastructures based on those needs for those chosen finalists to be able to move forward in that process of implementation.
Thank you, Caitlin. The next question that we have is on the call documents. It says that the grant size is 1 to 1.5 million, but on the readiness assessment, the brackets are 0 to 10, 10 to 50, 500K, etc. So what are the envisioned grant sizes? It seems that projects should be at least 1 million. Yes, this is a good question. And I would say in terms of why we put those different sizes of what the projects potentially may be, we put that there as one of the criteria, because you need to have a project that is going to be between 1 to 1.5 million US dollars over the 2 to 3 years. So if you have a project that is, let's say, for 10K, then that would be too small in terms of what we envision, because actually the reason why we wanted to fund some of these projects at around 1 to 1.5 million is then because that allows us to also use the element of scale in terms of scaling up the use and adoption of open research infrastructures across wider jurisdictions. So that would be why those particular questions are there. It's just to kind of help us to filter who really is eligible with the criteria that we have set out. Any other input from the team? Emmy, Caitlin, or we proceed? Great, I think we can proceed. So next question is, we are not a research network, but we are a global community of organizations, that's publishers, libraries, consortia, tech groups, that collectively defines an open standard. We are 0.5 FTE for staffing in the UK, and we will be co-applying with 2 other organizations, both US-based. Would we be eligible for funding? This is an interesting question. I think I would invite my other colleagues to chime in on this, but I can also give this a stab. It's a really nuanced question, this one. Given the fact that you are in the UK, the UK is not one of the regions that is eligible for this fund, but as we mentioned, there's a possibility for joint applications. In the criteria, one of the things that we have said is the majority of the members of a network need to be within one of these 3 regions. So if that would be the case, then we would consider that as a potential entry. I think the only kind of caveat that I may have here is the fact that you are not necessarily a research network, because we are looking specifically at research networks. So that perhaps maybe would be an interesting question to maybe share with us offline, and we can advise further. But I also invite my other colleagues, Caitlin and Emmy, to also chime in on this particular use case.
Go ahead, Emmy.
Thank you. Yeah, fully agree with what Jerry just said. I think reiterating the invitation to send us an email, because there are a lot of sort of specific cases where it's rather challenging to sort of unpack all of them fully in a call. But generally, we're looking at the lead applicant being a research network and having that membership criteria in terms of geography and numbers that Jerry have described previously. So for example, in this case, if the US-based organizations are research networks that have a majority of their members in the US, if they are then the lead applicant and the organization in the UK being a co-applicant, that would mean that this joint application as a whole would be eligible in principle. But yeah, there may be additional nuance there, and we'd love to help sort of clarify that through email.
And the last thing that I'll add is, and again, it gets into some of those details about the reach and the makeup of those other research networks, but I would say thank you for flagging, because it's we want to be able to encourage also collaboration with other organizations. So as you go through the network readiness assessment, if you find that your specific project may, say, score lower on others, that encouragement to reach out to other peer networks to maybe jointly apply is strongly recommended.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin and Emmy. In terms of the next question, there's a question in French, but the translation, let me just read the English translation of the question. Given that CRS Guinea has demonstrated its commitment to open infrastructures through its key role in the deployment of DHIS2 and its partnerships with stakeholders, what are the main expectations for an organization with such expertise to convincingly demonstrate its impact and ensure the sustainability of open infrastructures in public health systems in Africa? I think this is a good question. In terms of how to demonstrate its impact and ability, I think this is where we would rely on the pre-application form. That is, if you were to navigate, if you were to pass the first stage, which is the network readiness assessment form, and then in the proposal that you would submit in the pre-application, then the task ideally then for CRS Guinea would be to kind of make the case for this particular initiative that you want to do. And I think that would be the best way in which you can be able to demonstrate that potential impact and sustainability. Any other input from the team?
I would say that just to note that while everything Jerry had said about filling in the pre-proposal as best you can, we will dig into more of these questions through that due diligence phase as the process moves forward, because some of the things that are really difficult to screen out just across all of these three geographies, or even if we were looking at it on a continental basis, is understanding what level of support, say, a Ministry of Health in a particular country is providing, both financially or in kind. There's a lot of nuance there. And so our team will be working with those chosen finalists to better understand those at a deeper level. The main things that we are aiming to make sure we don't step into is the last thing we'd like is to invest in the rollout of this technology, the rollout and implementation of these systems, and then have them not be sustainable after the 2 to 3 year time frame in terms of accruing technical debt, maybe not having the resourcing that's needed. And those will be bits of support that the team will be working to provide, and working with those core teams to identify what that looks like after the conclusion of the project. And so there's more to come there. I would say interpret the sustainability question in the best way that you can, and provide as much information as you're able, which will help us better understand the realities where you are based.
Thank you, Caitlin.
I'll add a last note here that I'd strongly encourage you to read through section 5 of the call for proposal document, where we quite clearly, hopefully clearly lay out what the pre-application reviewers will be reviewing the pre-application against. But here again, like knowing that, like just looking at the folks who are at this call and previous calls and the input that's coming through from the network readiness assessment, we are there is a lot of need in this world, and we're trying to be, as understanding of the various contextual realities of different folks around the world as possible, while maintaining, fairness across our assessment process. So again, please look at section 5. That's how we are going to approach it. It will speak to some of the elements that will help you understand how you can put forward, sort of the best pre-proposal and the descriptions for the impacts of your work and the evidence for that as much as possible for that stage.
Thank you, Emmy. for that additional clarification. I think the next two questions are pretty similar in terms of, because they speak about the alignment of the organization to the eligibility criteria. I think, as Amy has mentioned, is just the compliance to the criteria that we have set aside. You can find more information on the call for proposals document. The next question that we have is AFLIA with members, with organizational members in 34 African countries would want to be a platform that would be linked to libraries across these countries for openly licensed research materials with translation of abstracts. However, we would want to do this from scratch. Is this type of project eligible? Can we do this alone, or should AFLIA seek collaborations with an organization such as with some of their partners with whom we have a working relationship? I would say in principle that this would be a yes, because you already have the institutional membership. You seem to have the kind of history with open infrastructures. I would say that this would be yes. Whether you would want to do this in collaboration with another network, I believe that as long as they meet the criteria set aside for joint proposals, this would be fine. So I would say in principle, this should be good to go. You can, in as much as it's a new idea, if the other criteria that we have set aside are met, then by all means, I think that should be fine. Any additional input, Caitlin, Amy?
I would say also part of how we envision the chosen projects moving forward. So IOI, for those that are less familiar, IOI also does a significant amount of work to understand the open infrastructure community. We have tools that provide information on over 100 open infrastructures in the ecosystem, and we have a really deep commitment to building with and on existing solutions rather than creating new solutions where there might be an opportunity to utilize something that's already in existence. Because we do want this support to go to the research networks, but also to help increase the embeddedness and expand the adoption of existing infrastructure solutions. That doesn't preclude us from building on top of existing infrastructure solutions if need be, to help extend their ability to be used in these contexts. And so just note for a group like AFLIA to keep in mind that part of what the work will be with the team from IOI working with chosen projects is to conduct needs assessment and understand if there are existing solutions that can be extended in and applied in these spaces, so that hopefully can accelerate the pace of implementing some of these, the rollout of some of these solutions as well.
Thank you, Caitlin. Next question, can applicants request an amount below $1 million? I think the answer to this would be no. As we have said in previous slides, is we are looking for projects within the range of $1 to $1.5 million. So anything that would be below that range would be considered as ineligible for this particular fund. Next question would be, are networks that include intergovernmental organizations such as CDC Africa eligible to apply? Then I think there's also, I think these are a series of interrelated questions. Are networks that include tech companies eligible to apply? And then what is your stance on artificial intelligence, and are AI-based projects eligible for funding? And then are networks created specifically for this application eligible? So perhaps maybe I can start with the last question. We have said that we are looking to support kind of existing networks that have an existing membership, very strong roots within the community. So while we would not preclude this, we would strongly advocate that networks need to already be in existence with deep roots to their communities, with a history of kind of promoting open infrastructure. Networks that include intergovernmental organizations such as the CTC Africa, I would say as long as these networks meet the criteria that we have set aside in terms of a network membership perspective, in terms of the usability of shared infrastructures, in terms of their commitment to community governance, as long as they meet the criteria, then that in principle should be okay. I'd want to invite, perhaps I think this question, Caitlin would potentially be best placed to answer in terms of the stance on artificial intelligence and AI-based projects.
And just quickly going back to the question around requesting an amount below 1 million. I know we've talked about this a few times in terms of the network readiness assessment and the different tiers that we have. I would say that, again, part of the work that IOI is aiming to do with these projects is to help model out and further flesh out the cost of implementation. And we know that some of why we are doing and moving this fund forward is that there are unforeseen costs that we want to make sure get as much resourcing as are necessary to make a project successful. The reason, again, just to underscore, we would encourage to think through, ambition size of projects at that $1 million mark. If you are coming in under that, it doesn't preclude you from applying. It's a means for us to understand, the scale of the envisioned project. Our team will also be looking to see if there are elements of those projects that may need more resourcing or might be able to move things forward. So, under 1 million is in some cases maybe an indicator to us that it's not at the scale that we're envisioning. But again, we understand that the realities in specific regions may differ. The resourcing that may exist within specific networks differs and varies quite broadly. But I would say, team up with others, scrutinize your budgets, think about that. It's meant as an encouragement for that to be the cost over the course of 2 to 3 years. Think about the staffing for that. Think about the technology implementation, the build out of the features. So again, in terms of that 1 million, like if it's 800, 900, that, like we would still encourage you to apply, but just to know that that's how we're filtering and looking through just to be able to check against some of the project plans. Including moving on to that question about artificial intelligence and AI related projects. We're open to those suggestions. I would also note part of why we are aiming to help support some of the foundational infrastructure to help ensure the usage of data and content from research is to ensure that any of these additional pieces of innovative technology, whether it's AI or advances in, say, climate or health or against sustainable development goals, et cetera, that those core systems are in place and viable and robust. And so I would encourage, if you are moving forward a project around artificial intelligence, to ensure that the underlying data and knowledge ecosystems, to make sure that that's a healthy, invested in space, that you're also scrutinizing what baseline infrastructure is needed to support the research and the knowledge that feeds those systems.
Thank you. Next question would be, is it safer to apply for less than the $1 to $1.5 million cap? I think this is something that Caitlin has just referenced, in that while we acknowledge that there may be contextual differences, if the budget is underneath 1 million, potentially look at teaming up with similar-minded organizations that share the same vision, so that potentially that can be able to meet the criteria that we have defined. Also, in the budgeting, are indirect costs accounted for while drafting the budget, say 10% of the direct total request costs? Yes, this is a good question. And for this particular fund, we have set aside that there is an indirect costs that is applicable to this fund of around 10% of the total budget amount. So we have factored that into the into the budgeting process. And so you are welcome to add the indirect costs, because we do understand that when you're looking at implementing a project, there are other ancillary costs that really contribute to supporting the development and the implementation of the project that would be applicable to the fund. Additional input from our team, or if that is okay, we can shift to the next.
Just to clarify, so in your budget, the 10% indirect is included as part of the total budget. So if you are requesting 1 million, for example, if you do have indirect costs, that should be within that 1 million. I'm not sure if that was my understanding of the question. So hopefully that helps clarify as well.
Great, thank you. If you don't support not ready platforms at this IOI fund, would you even consider any level of support for such startup projects? I think this is a similar question to the one that was posed about the web app earlier. I think that was the first question. And the answer to that particular question is that while we are not excluding these kind of novel solutions that may be being in development now, we are looking at also how can we be able to support a system that encourages building on top of already existing solutions. So for example, if this particular solution would have maybe, let's say, other similar initiatives or other similar open infrastructure tools that are already within that particular space, then we would potentially advise if a collaboration can be done with those other partners, so that it actually makes the consolidation of the ecosystem a lot more stronger in terms of avoiding duplication and ensure that we are supporting existing initiatives to grow and scale.
Yeah, I also just put a link in the chat for those that are building solutions. We also have a open infrastructure discovery tool called InfraFinder, which you're welcome to apply for consideration. It also gives you a sense as to some of the attributes that we look to, because we know that we don't take a hard line on a project needing to exist for X amount of years to be fit for community's needs, but it's part of a deeper part of our process to better understand where that supports the communities and the specific elements that are necessary for a successful project.
Thank you, Caitlin. Next question is, can we submit to the network assessment form a second time if my initial information was incorrect? The answer to this is yes. You can be able to submit the network readiness assessment. You can be able to do that multiple times. And also one of the things that would be important to note here is that also for the eligible networks, you also can be able to submit multiple proposals. So let's say you have 3 different proposals that you potentially would want to implement. You also are welcome to submit those proposals. Next question is, we are a community-based nonprofit organization aimed at climate resilience with responsible investments in agriculture and food systems. Would collaborating with a university to integrate ecological knowledge in research be an option for eligibility? I would say that one of the criteria that we have is that we are looking at networks in terms of like either at the national level or at the continental level. So if that component is inbuilt into the 2 organizations that would be collaborating, then we would consider that as a yes. If they do not, if the 2 joint applications, the 2 joint networks that are applying for this, the university and the non-profit, then we would say that as long as they are not in compliance with the criteria that we have set out for the joint applications, then that would not be eligible for the fund. Groups of universities who collaborated previously in research eligible? I would say that similar to the previous response is, as long as they are in compliance with the eligibility criteria that we have set aside, and particularly for institutions, for universities, would be interesting to kind of check particularly on the members, because typically for most universities, they tend to not have other members underneath them. But I would say that in this particular instance, just consult the eligibility criteria. If in compliance, it will be a yes, and if not, then I would say that that would not be eligible. Is there a website where we could find other eligible organizations to find if we can jointly apply? I would say the response to this particular question would be, unfortunately, no, but I would say that this is part of like the due diligence that an organization that is interested in submitting the application should be able to do in terms of checking out, like, are there any of my contemporaries or peer organizations or peer networks that are interested in a similar initiative? So I would say that this is largely up to the applying organization. Next would be, we are a agri-tech not-for-profit foundation based in Europe, aimed at facilitating the reuse of farm and field data. As part of our services, we develop open source tools to enhance the discoverability and aggregation of agriculture-related data. Would partnering with an international research center enable us to meet the eligibility criteria? So I think there's a prevailing thread to these questions in terms of they're just looking at the eligibility with partners in different contexts. And as we referenced earlier, as long as the network is in one of the three kind of regions that we are supporting, and they meet all of the other criterias for a joint application, then we would say yes, but that has to be in compliance with all of the different criterias that are set out. Next question would be, what do you mean by an open network? Is it in the context of research papers or also in terms of shared resources like community boreholes and community irrigation projects, food production? So when we talk about an open network, we talk about a network that is, first of all, community governed. They are committed to the use of open infrastructures. There's an element of transparency and accountability within the system. And also there's an element of kind of a strong relationship with the community. So in terms of this particular, some of the resources that you have mentioned, like community boreholes and community irrigation projects, unfortunately, this would not be in the scope of what we would be looking at, because when you talk about shared resources, we are talking about shared infrastructure or shared systems that allow the easy access, reuse, and reproduction of scholarly or scientific data. So that is what we mean by an open network. Next question, we are almost at time, so I want to, I'll try to speed run through these questions. We are a national network with 9 members. 10th and 11th members are expected to be joining in the next few months. The exact timeline is uncertain, but we will definitely have more than 10 members by the grant start date, but maybe before April 30. Is this an issue for eligibility? I would say that yes, this would be an issue because we are looking at a specific kind of window of application. So if unfortunately you would not have met that particular criteria, we would say that we would have a problem with the eligibility. The other question to also ask here would be, what's the compliance with the other criteria that we have set out? So I would say that given the fact that we are working with pretty tight timelines, I'd say no. What exactly are research networks? Is it academic institutions or any organization whose works as a result of research? Second, what do you mean by members in governance? Third, what's network membership? Must they have MOUs or casual partnerships? Perhaps maybe I would invite maybe Amy to give a response to this as I sip some water.
Thanks, Jerry. Yeah, I think so knowing that we're almost at the top of the hour, that we have more sort of detail around that membership criteria in section 3.2 of our call for proposal document. I think broadly speaking, and if you have any sort of specific examples here, might help us understand that question a bit more as well. Sorry for that brief answer, but it's just really sort of hard to unpack it from a short sentence like this, and would love to dig into more detail through emails and additional research as well. That's helpful.
Emmy, I can also provide a few quick examples.
Sure.
The aim here is for this work to be helping to explore the shared provision across a network that serves the research community, open infrastructure, because our belief is that if we have more institutions, more groups that are embedding open infrastructure, they can be more sustainable, you know, in terms of how it's not just reliant on one institution to keep that support alive. And so in some cases, and again, this differs geographically, in some cases that may be a consortia of universities, a consortia of libraries, in some cases that may be a national or regional research and education network. There are other organizations even represented here on this call that also serve, say, postgraduate researchers for a specific discipline, or other researchers across different research universities, again, for a specific discipline, or serve national repository infrastructures across one of the chosen regions. And so that's where we're using that language of research networks to indicate that we want this to be able to serve the research communities, but knowing again that there are different community-based organizations or organizational networks in specific regions that may be fit for purpose to do that.
Thank you, Caitlin. The last question that we have, it seems to be around a network that has an AI data-driven platform that collects and shares circular economy solutions, and are looking to grow our researcher practitioner collaboration to support locally driven systems. Are we expected to collaborate with another network, or can we apply from within our network? I think first I would want to say is that in as much as you're using AI and you're working in the circular economy space, are you using or intending to use open infrastructures in this particular project? Because that would be essential in this particular application. If that is a yes, and you have like the other criterias compliant, then potentially we would advise that you submit an application. Whether or not you would want to collaborate with a network, or you can apply from within your network, I think that is up to the jurisdiction of the applying organization, because at the end of the day, you know who best would be value aligned with you and who best can be a partner for that. So thank you for all of these questions. We are just at time. It has been a very fulfilling conversation. I would want to now hand over to my colleague, Amy, to finalize.
Thank you so much. And I know we are running over, so just a huge thank you to say that we had loved hearing your questions, and please keep them coming. The email address for your questions is engagement@investinopen.org. I've also put this in the chat. Please do let us know and reach out if you have any additional questions. Before we close, if you can still stay on for another minute, we'd love your feedback on this session. There's a very short poll that we're going to run right now, and we would love your feedback. Your feedback will greatly help us understand how we can improve sessions like this for the future. Once again, while you are reading through those short 5 questions, our email is engagement@investinopen.org for your additional questions. If you are interested in applying, please do go to our call for proposal blog post, click that network readiness assessment link and start that process as soon as possible. And do read through our call for proposal documentation and our FAQ, which is also available on our website as you work through the pre-application. All right. I think we have quite a few responses coming through the poll. So if you have filled that in, thank you so much for your feedback. And thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you have a very good day, morning, afternoon, evening ahead, wherever you are, and hope to see you and your pre-applications.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. I think we can also stop the recording here as well.